Well, good morning. It is Wednesday, June the 9th, and it's beautiful out here. We've had rain all week, and gosh, everything is just taken off. Today, I'm going to be making a strawberry rhubarb cobbler. So I'm out in the garden, and I'm getting ready to pick some rhubarb. These are my beautiful rhubarb plants. And these have been planted probably about 3 years. So what I'm going to show you is, now I've already taken several off of this big plant, so let's go over here and get a few off of this smaller plant. If I move the leaves up, you can see the stalks of rhubarb, and that's what you want. You don't want the leaves. So I'm going to take a knife, I'm going to go in here and I'm going to cut a stalk of rhubarb for you. And there it is. That's my stalk of rhubarb. Now I'm going to remove the leaf. You don't eat the leaf part, and I'll put it in the compost pile. Okay, we've gone out into the garden and harvested our rhubarb, and so now it's time to chop it up. This is my rhubarb, and it looks like celery. I mean, it really does look almost exactly like celery, except that it will have some red in the stems, and some of it will be really red according to the variety. But actually, it's not akin to celery at all. Celery is a member of the parsnip family, and rhubarb is a member of the buckwheat family, believe it or not. So now I wouldn't want to use these large stalks without cutting them down the center and cutting them in smaller pieces, because if you put big chunks of rhubarb in there, it might not get done at the same rate that your strawberries and your cobbler will. So I'm just going to chop this up into small dice. That may not be quite enough, but if it's not, I'll chop a little bit more. Now we're going to use a recipe that I have been making all my life. My mom found this recipe on the bag of a Southern Biscuit self-rising flour bag. When I was a young girl, I probably wasn't more than 12 or 13 years old. And she started making it. It's called a no-fool pie. And it kind of makes its own crust. So that's the recipe we're going to be using today. So let's get started. First of all, we have to melt butter in the pan while the oven is preheating. So now this recipe, the original recipe, made an 8x8 cobbler. So today we have a large pan, and so I am going to be doubling the recipe. So the original recipe is 1 stick of butter, 1 cup of self-rising flour, 1 cup of sugar, 1 cup of milk, and 1.5 cups of fruit, whatever kind of fruit you're making. You can use peaches with this, apples, whatever you want to make. But since we're doubling it today, I've got 2 sticks of butter in the pan, and I'm going to stick it in the oven while we preheat the oven to 350. Okay, so while we're waiting for the butter to melt, while we're preheating the oven, I'm going to go ahead and make the batter for our cobbler. So, in this big batter bowl, I am going to combine, let me get you down here where you can see a little bit. I think there's a glare on that. Maybe over here will be better. Okay. In this batter bowl, I am going to put 2 cups of self-rising flour. Now, I have sifted this flour before I put it in my canister so that it won't lump up. So that's 2 cups of self-rising flour. And then I'm going to put 2 cups of sugar. Now, the way you mix this batter together is extremely important. Don't pour your milk in on your flour. I'm going to put 2 cups of sugar in with the self-rising flour. And the reason I combine those two together before I put the milk in is because those sugar granules will act as kind of sandpaper and separate all the flour so it doesn't lump. So I combine those two really well first. So just to recap, we've got 2 sticks of butter in the oven melting in the pan. I've got 2 cups of self-rising flour and 2 cups of sugar in this bowl. And this is my 2 cups of milk, just regular whole milk. So now I'm going to pour that in there and it won't lump up. And using a whisk for this really helps too. All right, and there's our batter. Now let me check on that butter and I'll be right back. Now my butter is melted and I don't want it to brown at all, the butter, so I've got it melted in the pan. Now I'm going to take you right over here and I'm going to show you how we put this together. Alright, there's my melted butter in the pan. And now all we're going to do is just take this batter. Be sure and stir all the flour and sugar off the bottom of it first. And you pour it over that melted butter. You don't have to stir it. You just pour it on top. And now, I know the original recipe called for a 1.5 cups of fruit for that 8x8 recipe, which would be 3 cups of fruit for our doubled cobbler. But I like a lot of fruit in my cobbler, so I am going to put 2 cups of strawberries and 2 cups of rhubarb. And I started out with frozen strawberries, and I've got about 1.5 cups of those. So I'm just going to finish it out with some fresh strawberries, which will make it even better. And I cut mine up pretty coarsely. Now, you don't have to stir this in. All you do is just put your fruit on top of that batter mixture. Just like that. Now, if it all poured in at one time like mine did, you might want to spread it out a little bit. Now, I'm going to put 2 cups of rhubarb. Look at that, that's perfect. Now, if I had rhubarb left over, I could freeze that. It freezes really well. So just pour the rhubarb on top. And of course, if you were making just strawberry cobbler, you would use 4 cups of strawberries. Or peach cobbler, you would use 4 cups of peaches. But that's all there is to it. You don't have to stir that up. Just make sure that the fruit is kind of evenly distributed. Now we're going to open the oven and put it in the oven. And that oven is at 350 degrees, and I will be back when the cobbler's done, and I'll tell you exactly how long it took to bake it. So it's now been 45 minutes, and look how that crust is filling in the bottom, but it's not quite brown enough, so I'm going to set the timer for 15 more minutes, and hopefully it'll be done by then. Now our cobbler's been baking for 1 hour. And it is getting brown on top and looks absolutely beautiful. But we're going to have to check it to make sure that it's getting done in the center. Because sometimes It will brown around the edges, but it won't be done in the center. And we don't want it to be doughy in the center. So what I'm going to do is I'm just going to, I hope you can see that. Sometimes there's a little bit of glare on this camera. I'm going to pull it apart in the center a little bit just to make sure there's no dough in there, and that is perfectly done. I am going to let this bake 5 more minutes just to make sure that it's good and browned all over the top, and it's going to be done. So, okay, let's recap our recipe for a little bit. For this doubled cobbler, it was 2 sticks of butter melted in a pan while preheating the oven at 350, and then you mix 2 cups of self-rising flour, 2 cups of sugar, and 2 cups of milk together to make the batter, and you pour that over the melted butter in the pan. You don't need to stir it. Then you add 4 cups of whatever kind of fruit you want to make this beautiful cobbler. And you just pour that fruit on top. You don't need to mix it in. Okay, here is our cobbler. And I actually made this cobbler for somebody else, so I'm not going to eat a piece, but I am going to kind of lift a piece out of there just to show you. Look at that, how beautiful all that fruit is incorporated into the cobbler. Maybe I can, that beautiful strawberries and rhubarb. It's absolutely wonderful, and look how moist it is. So I hope you will try this cobbler. This has been a family favorite of mine and my family's for years. When I'm making a 1 recipe cobbler, I use my cast iron frying pan skillet to make it in, and it makes it really good. So I hope you'll try it and let me know how it turned out. Thanks. You guys have a wonderful day. It's a beautiful day that God's given us. Go out and enjoy it.